I think we're going to begin. I want to welcome everyone to the first Responsible Conduct of Research workshop within the series. It's a 6-workshop series. And my name is Catherine Sedota, and I am the Educational Workforce Specialist for the Workforce Development Corps. Dr. Noyes is not available today as she is out of town this week, and she sends her best. And really want you to get a lot out of this. Dr. Fliesler is an incredible speaker and actually is very engaging within his presentations. His actually was the first video I watched upon actually receiving this job in August. We are part of the Core Competency Workshop series, and we have quite a lot of them. We actually just finished up effective teaching, and we also finished up good clinical practice. So those two are already gone through the presentations and responsible conduct of research. Our first one is today, and then we have many more in March and a couple in April, as we are skipping one of them. And scientific communication then starts up in April and extends through May if you are interested in that one as well. So these are all of our workshop series that we run throughout a 2-year cycle in the fall and in the spring. And we are actually starting to plan the fall ones as we speak. I do want to tell you that, again, there are 6 different workshops within the Responsible Conduct of Research series. And we are very, very happy to have Dr. Fliesler do 2 of them at the beginning. And they extend again all the way through the 15th of April. I do also want to tell you that if you would like to receive a certificate of completion, if you attend all the workshops, and for most of the time frame that the workshop actually runs, 1.5 hour, then I will send you a certificate of completion at some time in April. If you are interested in the micro-credential, then you just need to email me, cmp9@buffalo.edu. My name is Catherine Sedota, and I will also be sending that to you probably tomorrow if you're interested in it. You need to attend the entire workshop series, and then there are 6 case study reviews that you have to do, and there's rubrics associated with it. I read a lot of warm and cool comments on them, and if you at least receive a fair then you're perfectly fine and you can move on to the next case study. If there are something that I really think you need to amend, then I will just tell you what you need to amend and you have a chance to resubmit those. And then you can receive a digital badge or a micro-credential, which you can actually put on your, for instance, LinkedIn account. And it's going to be connected to all of the work that you did within the micro-credential if you're interested. I also want to tell you that there is a survey that I'm going to be putting into the chat at the end of the presentation. And I also will be sending it to you a couple of times. It's extremely short. It only takes a couple minutes. And it's very important because it's used to improve the workshop series and also to report to our funding sources. So really very important. All of our emails, Dr. Noyes, my cohort, compadre, I'll say, Elizabeth Bangert is also on vacation this week. She's also usually here. And then my email's also there. I'm going to stop sharing and just turn it on to our, hold on, I got to first try to stop sharing. Okay, now I can stop share. And the floor is yours. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much, Catherine. And thank you, everybody, for attending today. I hope you're going to enjoy this series. I've been doing this for the last several years. And today I'm going to give a overview of the topic of responsible conduct of research in this workshop series. So it's going to be basic overview, introduction to the topic, and fundamental aspects of responsible conduct in research. I'm going to now try and share my screen. I'm going to go to, okay, so the outline for today's lecture is as following. First, I'm going to define research misconduct, plagiarism, and in its like. I have no conflicts of interest. This university, like most that receives federal funding, does have, so the University of Buffalo has an academic integrity policies that are posted on this website, and RCR training is a requirement here for candidacy for PhD degrees, for micro-credentials. Also, formal training in RCR is required. for any institution that receives federal grant funding for research. So faculty as well as fellows and trainees are all required to take this kind of training. The university also has a agreement with the Collaborative Institutional Training Initiative. All of us, including faculty, have to take these modular courses in RCR. If you work with human subjects, IRB training, IACUP training, etc. So this is just one of the modules that are available through the CITI program. Also, the federal government, through the Office of Research Integrity, has mandated responsible conduct in research training through programs such as this. They don't have necessarily a formalized, uniform training schedule or a format for training material. So it leaves it to the institution for doing this kind of training, but it is monitored. So we have foundational definitions that everyone should be familiar with. So first of all, this is part of our ethics series. And what are ethics? Ethics are a set of moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity, such as research. Ethics is a branch of knowledge that deals with moral principles. And what is academic integrity? That is the commitment to core values, and those are honesty, trust, fairness, respect, and responsibility. So where does this all come from? Moral reasoning, if you boil it down, is a binary decision. Is this right or is it wrong? And this goes back for many hundreds of years as philosophers over the centuries have pondered ethical behavior in society. And way back 500 BCE, Confucius postulated the silver rule, which was stated as never impose on others what you would not choose for yourself. You may be more familiar with what has become known as the Golden Rule through Judeo-Christian teachings. And that boils down to that which is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. And this was opposed by Hillel the Elder, who was a foundational rabbi and teacher in the history of Judaism. And then, of course, subsequent to that, the Golden Rule in Christianity, and it is the same in Islam, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So either postulated as the positive sense or the negative sense, it has to do with how would you want to be treated by others in society. Okay, so for this particular lecture, I have an overview. First, a historical perspective on the problem of responsible conduct in research. I'm going to talk about the evolution of definition of research misconduct has come about over the last 3 decades or so. The central principles boil down to falsification, fabrication, and plagiarism. And in the field of study of RCR, this is just abbreviated FFP. So UB has policies on research misconduct, and I will review those briefly. Then I'm going to go through several examples in our disciplines, what I call my Rhodes Gallery of offenders in FFP. I'll talk about the prevalence and the causes of violations in responsible conduct and research, how to deal with allegations of misconduct, what are the consequences as well as protections involved. And also at the end, we'll have cases for discussion. And this is going to require that all of you who are online here actually chime in. And I will ask people voluntarily, and if I don't hear somebody to step up, I will have my colleague, Sri Ganesh Ramachandra Rao, who's a new faculty member here, to call on people and ask people to answer directed questions. So the objectives here at the conclusion of this presentation, you should be able to know the currently accepted definition of research or scientific misconduct, and also know the processes by which the allegations of research misconduct are lodged, investigated, adjudicated, and also potential outcomes pursuant to findings of such inquiries. So if you want to learn more, there are literally thousands of resources that you can look into. I would highly recommend this one, which is free, Introduction to the Responsible Conduct of Research, that was put together by Nicholas Stenek, who's a professor at Michigan State. He's actually a sociologist, but the Office of Research Integrity asked him to put this together, and it's a very useful outline. But there are several other here that you might find of interest. So let's start off talking about the evolution of this problem. So here's a quote from a paper. Misconduct in science appears to be on the increase in some disciplines, but its prevalence is unknown, and how best to deal with it is unclear. Well, that was 2 decades ago, and things have really moved on since then. So let me give you just a very sketchy historical context of the first inklings that we have a problem in this country and other countries in responsible conduct and research. So in the early 1970s and then into the 1980s, there were multiple cases publicized of allegations of scientific misconduct, falsification and fabrication, as well as plagiarism. And these came out not only in the scientific literature and our conventional journals, but also in the public press. So places like the New York Times, San Francisco Chronicle, Washington, D.C. Newspapers, and the like. And so the public was becoming aware that there was something going on in the discipline of research. And why are they even caring? It's because basically U.S. tax dollars floats the vast majority of research that's conducted in this country. So in the early 1980s, there were congressional hearings on fraud and biomedical research that were convened by the Senate starting. And then in the late 1980s to the 90s, there were federal infrastructure that was put together, and definitions and policies were then put forward. And this was all done under the Department of Health and Human Services. And there were agencies that were then convened, such as the Office of Research Integrity, Office of Human Health Research Protections, Office of Science and Technology Protections. And so in the turn of the century, there were some well-publicized incidents of human subjects problems. That one of the most notable ended up in a patient dying on an experimental protocol, Jesse Gelsinger at the University of Pennsylvania. And then till now, there have been revisions of definitions, and then an emergence of broad-based educational initiatives and policies such as what you are listening to right now. So there was a problem at the outset because there were two diametrically opposed views on how to deal with this issue. So the philosophy of the scientific community was basically articulated by then president of the National Academy of Sciences and also the editor-in-chief of Science, Dan Koshland, who's a professor of biochemistry at the University of California, Berkeley at the time. And he stated, quote, "Problems of scientific misconduct are rare and the product of psychopathic behavior originating in temporarily deranged minds." And this was published in an editorial. The flip side, which was the public's perception, was articulated by then Senator Al Gore, who subsequently became a running mate of Bill Clinton and vice president of the United States, and then presidential candidate. He was at the time the chairman of the Congressional Hearings on Scientific Misconduct. And he stated one reason for the persistence of this type of problem is the reluctance of people high in the science field to take these matters very seriously. And as you can see, why he would say that, since Dan Kashlin has published this statement as I read above. So in 1989, there was an initial definition of research misconduct or scientific misconduct, and it was FFP, falsification, fabrication, or plagiarism. And this following part, or other practices that seriously deviate from those that are commonly accepted within the scientific community for proposing, conducting, or reporting research. It does not include honest error or honest differences in interpretation or judgments of data. The importance here that I would like to highlight is proposing, conducting, or reporting research. So if you write a grant proposal and you falsify data or fabricate data, or you plagiarize somebody else's ideas and put them into your grant proposal as if they are your own, that is research misconduct. In the actual execution of scientific research, if you engage in any of those three, that is research misconduct. And then finally, if you publish results that are falsified or fabricated, or you have plagiarized somebody else, that is a very egregious example of research misconduct. So over the next several years, then, there was a U.S. commission that was impaneled. And they say that research misconduct is significant misbehavior that improperly appropriates the intellectual property or contributions of others, in other words, plagiarized, that intentionally impedes the progress of research, or that risks corrupting the scientific record or compromising the integrity of scientific practices. That's falsification and fabrication. Such behaviors are unethical and unacceptable in proposing, conducting, or reporting research, and then they added, or in reviewing the proposals or research reports of others. So people who are sitting on study sections or editorial boards or serving as reviewers in either instance, all of this applies to them. That was an important addition to the original 1989 definition. So this reflects the current definition under the ORI. Research misconduct is defined as fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism in proposing, performing, or reviewing research, or in reporting research results. Pretty much covers the gamut. Interestingly, the statement about deviating from scientific norms was deleted. Why? Because there was not consensus about what are those scientific norms. They vary from discipline to discipline. So it couldn't be a across the board inclusion in the definition. So let's be clear about what is FFP. Fabrication is making up data or results and recording or reporting them. So putting it into your lab notebook, and if it never sees the light of day from there on, is still fabrication. It's worse when you actually report them, put them into a grant proposal, etc. Falsification is manipulating research materials, equipment, or processes, or changing or omitting data or results such that the research is not accurately represented in the research record. And finally, plagiarism is the appropriation of another person's ideas, processes, results, or words, and here's the key, without giving appropriate credit. And in my lecture 2 next Monday, I will go into a deep dive on this particular topic. Okay. So this was a very interesting paper that was published in the PNAS a little over a decade ago. Misconduct accounts for the majority of retracted scientific publications. And I was surprised to find that the US leads the world in scientific fraud. China is #1 in the world in plagiarism. And I see this, I'm an editor-in-chief of one of the prominent journals in vision science. And I see this actually, unfortunately, very frequently. And China is the #1 in the world offender in duplicate publications, where somebody submits the exact same work or almost the identical work to 2 or more different journals at the same time and tries to get 2 and 3 and 4 papers out of the exact same work. Okay, that is not allowable and it's not ethical. So here's a particular case, and I pull a lot of these things off of the public scientific information stream. And here's a case of a professor at Harvard, Mark Hauser. This was more than a decade ago now, but today the Harvard Crimson reported the results of an investigation by the school into possible scientific misconduct by Mark Hauser, a professor of psychology, who studies the cognitive function of primates. The data and the conclusions of several papers published in respected journals had been brought into serious questions. The judgment: Hauser is responsible for 8 instances of misconduct in his lab, including the falsification of data. The dean of the faculty at Harvard has moved to fulfill the school's obligations to the funding agencies and scientific community and to pose appropriate sanctions. I will talk this latter part about responsibilities of the institution, both to the funding agencies as well as to the scientific community towards the end of my lecture here. Here's another example, University of Kentucky, image duplication and falsification of data. There was a husband and wife duo that were doing research at University of Kentucky. They not only published research, but also submitted grant applications that had duplication of data and falsified data. They both lost their jobs. There are 2 kinds of falsification. There's acts of omission and acts of commission. Acts of omission is where you consciously are not revealing all of the data. That is, you deleting the data that to your mind don't fit. Now, there is a way of data analysis and statistical analysis that allows for the removal of outliers, but you have to report that that is what you did. Okay, and there are good reasons why, if something is way, way, way off the curve, that there could have been something wrong in how the data were collected. And so that is appropriate, but not to just willy-nilly pick and choose and cherry pick just the data that fit your preconceived notion about how things should look. Okay. Then there are acts of commission, consciously altering or fabricating data, or over interpretation of the data. So forcing agreement with your preconceived notion of how the results should look. That's falsification. So the Office of Research Integrity is operational under the Department of Health and Human Services, and they oversee the research enterprise across the United States and all the federally funded programs. So I'm just going to talk about plagiarism because I've talked about falsification and fabrication here. So what is plagiarism? As a general working definition, Office of Research Integrity considers that plagiarism includes both the theft or misappropriation of intellectual property and the substantial unattributed, keyword unattributed, textual copying of another person's work. It does not include authorship or credit disputes. By unattributed means that you didn't give the original source from whence you took those words or ideas. Alternately, the theft or misappropriation of intellectual property includes the unauthorized use of ideas or unique methods obtained by a privileged communication, such as a grant application or a manuscript under review. This happens, unfortunately, more frequently than you might think. So plagiarism turns out to be a very big problem in China. And I think that the majority of these cases are really not people trying to be basically intentionally being miscreant. It's because the English language is a very difficult language, and particularly for people from the Asia Pacific areas where the structure of their alphabet, their words and language are so different from English that it is very, very difficult for them to be able to express themselves coherently in the English language. And so if they see typically more often than not methods that are, let's say, routine methods such as Western blotting, electrophoresis, immunohistochemistry, and the like, they simply say, okay, this was stated in such a good way, I just can't improve upon this. And they cut and paste and drop it into papers. And so today I handled 12 manuscripts for the journal for which I'm the editor-in-chief, and I had 4 instances of suspected plagiarism, 4 out of 12. And this is not unusual for me in a given week. Okay, by the way, they were all from China. Okay, so it is such a common problem that all of the world's major publication houses, like for instance, Elsevier, which oversees something like 1,800 journals in life sciences alone, they utilize computer-based platforms to detect plagiarism. What they do is they have character recognition, and they can identify words, strings of words, sentences, paragraphs that are either identical, verbatim, or very, very similar to something that's already in the database as published. This is just an example of a case that I handled a long time ago. And this particular case was found to have the text was 72% identical to previously published work. Now, you have to be very, very careful in simply just taking this on face value. For instance, with the advent of preprint servers, so a lot of people will publish their manuscripts on a preprint server, which is a non-peer-reviewed format. And so their text will appear in the database. And so if you run an authenticate analysis on a manuscript that comes through for a peer review, it is not unusual to see 90, 95%, 98% authenticate scores. That's because it's on a preprint server. That's allowable. It's non-peer reviewed, okay? But if you, as you can see, the tool will color highlight the text that has been detected as being found in other sources, and it will actually give you a printout of the exact sources. Okay, so here, however, here is another manuscript, also from China, but has a very, very, very low authenticate score. It's almost impossible to have a 0% score. There's going to be something in the manuscript that is going to come out, for instance, in a very commonly used method. There's only so many ways that you can describe how these particular methods are done, okay? So this report is just to show you that not everybody from China is engaged in apparent plagiarism. Scientific misconduct occurs around the world. It is everywhere. Here's an example, not in the scientific discipline, okay, but this is a very well-known journalist, Fareed Zakaria. He was suspended for copying another writer's work. He came out and admitted that this was the fact, and he apologized for this. But it does happen where people will see an idea, the way that somebody expressed something, and then they verbatim plug it into what they're writing. There is something that many people I have found are not aware of as a problem, and it's called self-plagiarism. Due to copyright laws, you cannot copy substantial portions of text from one of your own prior publications and use it in a subsequent publication without placing the text in quotes and citing the original source. Similarly, you cannot use the same figures, illustrations, tables in more than one publication unless you get prior permission from the copyright holder and duly credit the original source accordingly. The most commonly occurs in review articles, in which case you are bound by the rules of the journal that you cite in the figure legend that this was either reproduced in whole or part or modified from the previous publication and state exactly where you got it. Okay. Usually what I instruct people to do is don't use the exact same words. Just say that this was done essentially as previously detailed and give the citation. And then if there are any variances, then say with the following changes. Okay. So how do you avoid plagiarism? First of all, take clear, accurate notes about where you found specific ideas. You know, you're reading papers all the time, journal articles, and something comes up that is very pertinent to what you're working on. Just write down notes about where you got these ideas, the author and the journal and citation. Use quotation marks when you're directly stating verbatim another person's words, and always give that original citation information. So for instance, I'm not a gifted artist, so I didn't make this little cartoon that's in the lower right-hand side. Where I did get it from is I'm crediting with this URL at the bottom of the slide. Okay, so again, in our disciplines, there are articles that pop up all the time, such as in common, very high-tier journals like Nature, also in The Scientist, which comes out weekly, and I get things from there almost on a weekly basis. So here's an article that came out a while ago. British science needs integrity overhaul, and basically decries the fact that there is a major problem with people engaging in scientific misconduct in England. And here is a very stunning statistic. Coinciding with a meeting, the British Medical Journal survey of over 2,700 doctors and medical academics showed that 13% claim to have firsthand knowledge of inappropriately adjusting, excluding, altering, or fabricating data. 6% said that they were aware of cases of possible research misconduct at their institutions that they thought had not been properly investigated. Kind of stunning. Okay, here's another a quote, misconduct of others, prevention techniques for researchers. And this quote, I think I'll read, few people can distinguish between the smell of day-old fish and the odor of the paper in which it was wrapped. That's just how it is with scientific misconduct. The misconduct of those working with you may become yours. In the worst case, your lab is shut down, okay? Your publications are retracted. Also, you could have grant funding revoked. And your name becomes suspect. Even if you reported the suspected misconduct and the investigation is fair, the accuser and the accused may become intertwined as the investigation proceeds. All too often, the reporter and the reported blame each other, making the investigation protracted and contentious until the allegation is sustained or not. This is a very important point because science is increasingly collaborative. In addition to the people in your own research group, you may be collaborating with people next door or down the hall or across the university or across the country. You are having to rely upon their integrity when they're reporting to you their findings that are contributing to your overall study, and particularly when you're going in either for a grant application or you're going in to publish something. okay? So why does this matter? Okay, number one, it undermines the public trust in medical research and health workers. As I mentioned previously, it's the public, the tax dollars that support the overwhelming majority of research in this country. Very importantly, it corrupts the scientific record and it leads to false conclusions and it leads to significant waste of resources, money, time, and effort chasing down false leads. So very often when we read a report, such as in a high-tier journal like Science or Nature or Cell or PNAS, our first thought is, well, this was peer-reviewed. It must be true, until it's determined that it is not true. Meanwhile, you are thinking, oh, I'm going to do some experiments to follow up on this, thinking that what has been reported is the factual basis. And now you conduct your experiments and you keep coming up with the wrong result. Wrong in that it doesn't agree with your preconceived notion of how it should look because it doesn't agree with that publication that you read. And you do it over and over again, thinking you're doing something wrong. And it turns out you're not doing anything wrong. What is wrong is what was reported, okay? Meanwhile, you've spent a whole bunch of time and effort, reagents, money, animals possibly, maybe human subjects, and you're chasing down these false leads, okay? You can see why this is a major problem. Okay, I'm going to segue now into what I call my rogues gallery, and I'll go through several cases. All of these are pretty much at high profile places, okay? So the first one is what I call the Sloan Kettering affair. It involved a former researcher, Dr. William Summerlin. He had claimed to transplanted human corneas onto rabbits, which is, if you think about it, is pretty odd since there are cell surface antigens that are presented that tell the body of self versus not self. So that was remarkable. He faked the transplantation experiments on white mice by blackening patches of their skin with a pen. Literally, he did this in the elevator, bringing animals up in the elevator in a cage to show his supervisor with a black Sharpie. His misconduct was suspected, but was long ignored by people in the lab and his supervisors. And eventually they said, this guy was just mentally ill. And this is kind of the basis of Dan Koshland's statement in Science about temporarily deranged minds. Okay, this guy was a very bright guy. And when I was in graduate school, this case came out. And I remember this very well. It was so heavily publicized, a book was published by Joseph Hickson called The Patchwork Mouse. And if you get a chance, this is a really good read, okay? Vijay Soman, another researcher here, he was at Yale. He published 12 papers where the data was either missing or fraudulent, and all of those papers were eventually retracted. A paper that he co-authored with the division chief, Philip Fliesler, who was a senior researcher, was actually stolen from somebody else when Professor Fliesler was sent a paper to review, and he passed it to Dr. Soman to actually do the review, and Soman simply lifted that other author's work and tried to publish it as his own. Soman was fired and Fliesler had to resign. This is going to come up in my second lecture where I talk about honorary or gift authorship. John Darcy, Harvard Medical School, Department of Cardiology. I was working under a world-class cardiologist, Gene Braunwald. He was actually falsified data, observed falsifying data, but nobody ever did anything about it until it became just so very evident. A few months after this initial event, the results had been obtained in a multi-center study, were very different from those obtained by others. So here's the part, again, about collaborations, having to trust the various people who are contributing results and observations to the study. An investigation showed that more than 100 published studies were fraudulent, and many of those studies included so-called co-authors who actually had little or nothing to do with it. Their names were put onto the paper for added gravitas. Okay. Bob Slutsky, not that cardiology is rampantly engaged in misconduct, but happened to be a cardiological radiologist at UC San Diego School of Medicine, published 137 papers between 1978 and 1985, sometimes one every 10 days. Now, I don't know about you. I've been doing this gig for about 4 decades, and I have never published a paper in 10 days. In fact, it takes me typically at least a month to write and put together and submit manuscripts, okay? So this was just very suspect, okay? A reviewer raised troubling questions about some of Slutsky's work, again, illustrating how peer review can work and detect possible fraud. An investigation concluded that 12 of Slutsky's studies were definitively fraudulent and that 49 were questionable. Many of these, but not all of them, were retracted by journals. Some of the journals actually declined to retract those studies for reasons that are beyond me. I don't understand it. This is a case that I will talk about a little bit in the next lecture, but I'll give you just a synopsis. I know this case personally because at the time I was a postdoc at Baylor College of Medicine at the Culinary Institute, and David Bridges was a world-class vision scientist recruited from NYU, but originally from England. He was sent a manuscript from a member of the National Academy of Sciences, John Dowling, who's a longtime professor at Harvard. And so at the time, the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences would have a member of the Academy would serve as an editor, distribute manuscripts for review by people in the field, and ask for their opinions. Well, Dr. Bridges had been working on this problem that was the central component of what this manuscript was that he was sent to review by John Dowling from a competing laboratory. He declined the review, but not for a while. Several weeks had passed on the basis of, quote, a conflict. Meanwhile, he repeated all of the experiments that were laid out in this manuscript verbatim. They all panned out exactly like the original manuscript had reported. And so he simply wrote up his own manuscript, submitted it to a completely different journal, Science, and the senior author from Harvard, Bob Randall, contacted Dr. Dowling, raised an issue of suspected plagiarism. How did he know? One of the things that happened with this particular case is that Dr. Bridges' manuscript to Science was sent to Dr. Rando as a possible reviewer. So he basically outed himself. Okay, so the NIH impaneled a esteemed panel of vision scientists, and the panel concluded the researcher took data from paper he peer-reviewed and used it for his own work. The accused says it's just not true, but NIH recommends debarment, and that is what happened. David Bridges, meanwhile, while this inquiry was going on, he was in the process of taking a job that he was offered at Purdue University. Purdue thought that they were getting this world-class scientist who had NIH funding and great gravitas. What happened was that when this panel's findings came out, David Bridges had all of his grants removed. He was barred for 10 years from receiving federal grant funds. He was also debarred for life from serving on NIH study sections review panels and editorial boards. At the time, he was the editor-in-chief of Vision Research, and he was removed from that board. And he was debarred from serving as a reviewer for any peer-reviewed publication for that period. At the time that this happened, he was about 58 years old. So 10 years would put him at 68 before he was even eligible to even be considered for funding. He never was funded after there. This is a very famous case. There was several papers published, very high-profile papers about human stem cell cloning. And this particular investigator from South Korea was heralded by the scientific community. He was given a ticker tape parade in Seoul when it was announced that this work had been published and publicized worldwide. Unfortunately, it was found out that essentially all of the work was fabricated. It was complete research misconduct. And this was reported in the scientific literature, that science editorials in particular, and then also by the public press worldwide. And he was at the time the director of probably the largest scientific research institute in South Korea. He was fired. Okay. Then here's the editorial that Donald Kennedy, who was at that time editor-in-chief of Science, had published. So this will happen that once there are these adjudications that there's a finding of misconduct, the journal where the work was published then is required to publish a retraction. And in this case, because it was so high profile, that the editor-in-chief wrote a special editorial describing this case. So along this same time period, it was found by several journals that there was a need for really looking much more closely at especially digitized images. And the Journal of Cell Biology is a journal that relies heavily upon electron microscopy, confocal microscopy, fluorescence microscopy, and the like. And so it turns out they did a deep dive on manuscripts that they received that had potentially a problematic image manipulation. And this was on the heels of what had occurred in South Korea. So here they report since 2002, this was just over a 4-year period to January of 2006. When the test was put in place, 25% of all accepted manuscripts have had one or more illustrations that were manipulated in ways that violate the journal's guidelines. The executive editor stated, the editor of the journal, Ira Mellman of Yale, said, most cases were resolved when the authors provided originals. In 1% of the cases, we found authors have engaged in fraud. But subsequently, it's been found that it's a much bigger number. Here's a case that was reported also in Nature and then to New York Times. A Nobel Prize winner retracts research paper. This was because not this particular person, Linda Buck, knowingly committed research misconduct or fraud, but it was underlings that worked in her laboratory. Also, here's a follow-up in The Scientist. Again, this is a free weekly journal that comes out and exposes these cases quite frequently. Here's another case, also from Harvard, former assistant professor at Harvard Medical School at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, talks about how he falsified and fabricated data in a study of sleep apnea. So here's thoughts from somebody who engaged in research misconduct. So it's kind of like the police hiring a burglar who's, very adept at his trade to help them solve crimes. So here he states, and this is published, misconduct in science is increasing at an alarming rate and is an issue that needs to be addressed. The constantly evolving technology, especially the electronic media, the arrival of online-only journals, other significant scientific developments warrant a reconsideration of the existing procedures in place to prevent fraud and the development of novel verification techniques. He was a researcher at Mayo Clinic, and he was fired for research misconduct in 2010. Here's an area that is still not really well known. How common is research misconduct? So this is from a somewhat dated now editorial from the British Medical Journal. At the time, the editor-in-chief was Richard Smith. Redundant publication occurs in approximately 1/5 of published papers, and also 1/5 of persons listed as co-authors of studies in medical journals contributed little or nothing to those studies. Most authors of studies in medical journals have conflicts of interest, and yet they are declared in less than 5% of the cases. In my second lecture that will be on Monday, I'm going to go much further into this particular topic. So why does it happen? Well, why wouldn't it happen? It happens in every other human engagement and activity. There's also tremendous pressure on researchers, publish or perish. You are not going to get promoted from assistant to associate or associate to full professor if you don't publish your work and have a volume of publications. And now, even more so, high-tier publications with high impact factors. Also, it had been previously at least ascribed to some inadequate training. That should not be the case, because everybody who's engaged in the scientific enterprise that has any funding source, particularly federal, has been required to take the kind of training that you're taking right now today. But here's just the simple be-all explanation. You can get away with it for at least for a while. Why? Because the system is built on trust. Okay? And like I said, this collaborative enterprise, you have to trust people that are engaged in the collaboration. So, what are the consequences? Okay? If fraud takes place in a clinical trial, it places all of the human subjects in that trial at possible safety risk. Fraud jeopardizes the reliability of submitted and or published data, and it also undermines the U.S. Public Health Service's mission to protect and promote the public health. Very important. I don't know how many people on this call have IRB-approved studies or are contemplating them. You have to keep this in mind. So a finding of research misconduct requires three things. First, there must be a significant departure from accepted practices of the relevant research community. It has to be, the misconduct has to be committed intentionally or knowingly or recklessly, and the allegation must be proven by a preponderance of the evidence. This is basically on British common law. Dealing with research misconduct. So here are the processes and protections that are in place. First of all, it has to be fair and impartial. There has to be protections for the informant, the so-called whistleblower, the person who raises the allegations of misconduct. There has to be protection of the accused, in legal terms called the subject. Then objectivity and expertise are absolute musts. It has to be done in a timely manner. It can't be allowed to drag on. And very importantly, confidentiality is extremely important. None of these allegations and any of the processes of adjudication should be discussed outside of the review process. So there are three phases in responding to allegations of misconduct. So first, there's an inquiry phase, the assessment of whether the allegation has substance and if an investigation is warranted. So if there is smoke, there must be fire. So an investigation then is convened, a formal development of a factual record, the examination of that record leading to dismissal of the case or to a recommendation for a finding of research misconduct or other appropriate remedies. And finally, adjudication, during which recommendations of that panel are reviewed and appropriate corrective actions are determined. That typically will take place at the provost level and could also rise to the level of the president of the university. So we want you to recognize and report research misconduct. If you see something that's wrong, say something, because the longer you let that go on and on, that simply reinforces the bad behavior of the person engaged in the misconduct. So, protections of whistleblowers, safeguards for informants. Safeguards for informants gives individuals with a confidence that they can bring allegations of research misconduct that are made in good faith, that's very important, to the intention of the appropriate authorities of serve as informants to an inquiry or an investigation without suffering retribution. Safeguards include protection against retaliation for informants who make good faith allegations, fair and objective procedures for the examination and resolution of allegations of research misconduct, and diligence in protecting the positions and reputations of those persons who make allegations of research misconduct, again, in good faith. So if you make an allegation against somebody because you don't like them or you have some issue with them, and so you're knowingly falsely giving allegation to damage that person, you are going to be in huge trouble. So these protections only apply to people that make allegations of misconduct in good faith. And the fundamentals of British common law and the United States law, which is based upon that, is innocent until proven guilty, okay? So there are safeguards for the subjects, the person against whom the allegations are made. Safeguards for the subjects give individuals confidence that their rights are protected and that the mere filing of an allegation of research misconduct against them will not bring their research to a halt or be the basis for other disciplinary or adverse action if absent other compelling reasons. Other safeguards, including timely written notification of subjects regarding substantive allegations made against them, a description of all such allegations, reasonable access to the data and other evidence supporting the allegations, and the opportunity to respond to the allegations, the supporting evidence, and the proposed findings of research misconduct, if any. What are the consequences? Kind of like the Gilbert and Sullivan opera from many years ago, the Mikado, let the punishment fit the crime. So seriousness of the misconduct. In deciding what administrative actions are appropriate, the agency should consider the seriousness of the misconduct, including but not limited to, 1, the degree to which the misconduct was done knowingly, intentionally, or recklessly. Remember, this was part of the federal definition. Was an isolated event, so was it a one-off, or part of a chronic pattern of behavior, or had significant impact on the research record, research subjects, other researchers, institutions, or the public welfare. So you can argue that, well, I falsified data in my lab notebook, but I never published it, and I never presented it at a national meeting. Still research misconduct, but you know what? It really didn't damage the research record because nobody has read your falsified information, so they're not going down the line basing their own research on false information, okay? So what are the potential consequences? Well, if you're found to have falsified, fabricated or plagiarized material in a publication, that publication likely will be retracted. As you saw in the case of David Bridges, debarment, loss of grant funding, current and future, removal from editorial boards, grant review panels, etc. Some people might consider that a blessing, but not so much, especially if you're going up for promotion, where one of the things that is looked at is what kind of service do you perform for the community, editorial boards, grant review panels, etc. Typically, you have to have a certain level of stature to even be asked to do those kinds of activities. You could be fired, okay? You could be terminated. And as the people found out when their cases were splashed all over the pages of the New York Times and other journals, as well as scientific journals and publications, public humiliation. It is the gift that does not go away, keeps on giving. There will be a record of your activities forever because it will persist on the internet. So here's a case. Every year, the Office of Research Integrity penalizes a handful of biomedical scientists for misconduct, typically barring them from funding for a few years, could be decades. In theory, once the penalty period is up, the punishment and the shame should be over, but that's not the case. Pardon me. However, in the age of the internet, announcements of debarments that ended years ago are easily retrievable with an online search of the scientist's name. And this happens. So in conclusion, just do the right thing. Do not do the wrong thing, okay? This is a very simple, easily obtainable, a primer of avoiding ethical violations. This is published in the Journal of Biological Chemistry. That's a key publication from the American Society for Biochemistry and Molecular Biology, and this is freely available, and I would highly recommend that you keep a copy of this somewhere handy from my lecture outlines. And by the way, the lecture slides for all of these lectures are available to you. There are many, many references. Here are just a few, and I alluded to at least this introduction to responsible conduct to research early on. So I think at this point, shall we take just a few moments for any questions from the chat?
Absolutely, but I don't see much. I see someone that says this group might be interested in checking out the COPE, Council on Publication Ethics website, which provides case studies and guidelines for dealing with publication misconduct. But that's in the chat, but I see no questions. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat or unmute and ask.
Great, and I will mention COPE in my second lecture on Monday.
Excellent, thank you. You want to go on to the case studies? If I get a question, I will address it in between two case studies. Is that okay?
Great, thank you so much. Sorry for the technical problems on my end for this lecture. Hopefully you were able to see things, okay? So these are cases that I came up with originally. So let's just launch right into it. So these cases are going to exemplify the material I just presented. Okay, so here's a case to consider. John is trying to get his lab work done in a hurry because he's scheduled to fly home the next day for summer vacation. However, the results of his most recent experiments are not coming out the way he had predicted, i.e., the experiments didn't work right. Several of the data points fall far from the best fit line for dose response, and statistical analysis, ANOVA, of the data indicates a lack of significance between treated versus control sets. John decides to remove the data points that don't seem to fit well with the others. By doing this, the remaining data conform to his preconceived notion of how the results should look. The graph of the data is linear with a correlation coefficient nearly equal to 1, and the ANOVA indicates high statistical significance. John is pleased with this outcome and goes home for vacation thinking everything is just fine. Okay. Is John guilty of scientific misconduct? Why or why not? Somebody unmute and blurt it out. Anybody? Gonna have my enforcer.
Afternoon.
Yes. Active omission.
Acts of omission. So it is scientific misconduct. Is that what you're telling me, Rich?
Yes.
Yes. So it's under the definition of falsification, fabrication, plagiarism. It comes under case of falsification of data, right? Because not reporting all of the data that were collected. Yeah. Anybody else have comment?
Just so you know, Megan is not able to talk to everyone, but she just wants to point out that this is misconduct because the person is cherry picking data.
Yep, exactly correct. Thank you. So I actually already covered the second part. What part of the scientific, the definition from ORI is the scientific misconduct done action fall into falsification, right? Would your answer be different if John simply kept these results in his lab notebook or computer, but didn't ever publish them or present them in a public forum? Why or why not? The central question is this scientific misconduct? Answer? Somebody?
Yes, yes, it's still scientific misconduct.
Why?
Because he's already falsified the data or removed information, even though it's not published.
Good. So as I stated more than once, the very fact that you didn't ever show it to anybody, publish it, present it in a meeting, the very fact that you just entered it in the record, the scientific record, in your notebook, on a computer, wherever you put it, that's research misconduct. This is a very important thing. There are a lot of people who think, oh, I never reported it, so it's no fault, no foul, right? No, not right. Okay. Would your answer be different if John submitted the results in a grant application, but it was not funded? Is it still research misconduct? Somebody different.
Yes, it's still misconduct.
Why is that, Michelle?
Well, because he's in effect publishing or making public these results and actually trying to use false results to get grant money and maybe depriving somebody who's honest of getting the same grant money.
That certainly is true. And remember when I was talking about how there was an evolution of the definition of research misconduct, additional verbiage about reporting, reviewing, submitting for consideration of funding. That's all included under the ORI's current definition. So it is falsification, no matter. Even if that grant never gets funded, somebody reviewed that grant application, was basing their conclusions on what they were presented, and they were misled. Yeah. So you wasted study section's time as well. And it would have been even worse if it was funded, right? Because now it's completely, now you're spending public money on a false idea. So what should John have done instead? What should he have done before leaving for vacation with his data? Somebody else. Somebody.
Short of just, including all the data he already had, running more experiments to perhaps normalize what he expected to see may have been the best case scenario.
So that's a really good answer. So we're not given the information of how many data points he had. So if he had 3 points to make a line, that would be about as minimal as you could possibly be doing. So what you're saying is to increase the N, right? The independent observations.
Yes, exactly.
The other thing that I would strongly recommend is that John should have gone to a statistician to ask professional help about what is the N, how about doing a power calculation to find out the N that you would need at minimum to make any conclusions from the data that were statistically significant? Okay. And I always tell our residents and fellows here, don't go to the statisticians at the end of your study. Go have that meeting at the front of your study, so you know how many patients you need to enroll in your study, how many mice that you need to use in your experiment you're proposing to do. And the NIH, by the way, requires you to do a power analysis. Okay, so he should have gone to somebody who has the knowledge base to know, hey, you don't have enough data, you need to increase your N, and also could be advised, hey, this thing is on Jupiter, this data point, okay, it's so clearly off the mark. Maybe something got contaminated in that test tube or whatever procedure that he did, that something procedurally happened that wasn't like all the other samples, okay? That can happen, all right? So there are ways to exclude data that should be excluded. The best person to consult is a statistician to talk over the methods and the data. Okay.
I have one question in the chat.
Sure.
How often are reports of misconduct made but eventually dismissed after thorough investigation?
It's a very, very good question, and I don't have an answer for that. And I would say it's probably varies by institution to institution. So it depends on how often these things come up and what are the veracity of the data that are presented to the committee. So I don't have a good answer for that. My suspicion is, because I actually unfortunately had to be part of a panel that reviewed some cases like this. Usually, the committee is going to require really a good amount of trustworthy data. And so I would say more often than not, these cases go to adjudication where they find against the subject. But sometimes they do get dismissed for lack of sufficient evidence. Not that the person didn't engage in misconduct, they simply couldn't make a determination. Okay.
Great, thank you. And
Great, very good question. You know what? I've been doing this for years. Nobody ever asked me that question. So thank you.
I believe that Sheree put a documentary about the Korean scientists who faked his cloning experiments. There is a link in the chat, so please everyone check that out.
Thank you, Sri. I'm going to move on to case 2 because we have about 10 more minutes. So Janie has been trying to get her experiments to work according to her preconceived notion, again, of how they should appear, but they just aren't panning out. She's under a lot of pressure from her PhD advisor to get new results for a grant application he's planning to submit in a few weeks. So Janie decides to construct a graph of data that she didn't actually collect, but that would seem to conform with the known literature and also her concept of how the experiment should work. She gives the graph to her advisor, who says, wow, these are great results. They're just what I needed for my NIH grant application. Good work. Janie leaves the lab happy that her advisor is so pleased with her work. However, several hours later, as she's trying to go to sleep, she has second thoughts about what she's done. Okay, did Janie commit scientific misconduct? Why or why not? Somebody that we haven't heard from yet. Cedric, how about you? Are you live?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I answered the last one too, but let's see. I would say that yes, there is misconduct here, based on commission.
Okay, and what if it was? Is it falsification, fabrication, or plagiarism?
I would say it is fabrication.
You would be correct, because as I stated, she didn't even collect the data. She just came up out of thin air and just put it together how she thought it should work. So exactly correct. If her advisor decided not to include the graph in his grant application, would this change your answer? Was Janie still guilty of scientific misconduct? We've had this scenario has been covered
Hi.
in
So I'll answer.
Shanice?
Yes, it would still be misconduct, even if it wasn't added in the grant application, because you still fabricated data.
Correct.
So it's still misconduct.
And technically it is part of the scientific record. Okay, she's created a graph. It's a physical piece of evidence. Okay, so you're exactly correct. This is a little more uncomfortable. If her advisor did include her graph in his grant application, is he guilty of scientific misconduct? Why or why not?
Hi, I would say yes, he would be guilty.
Okay, and why don't you tell us why?
Because he knowingly or unknowingly used fabricated data.
Correct. But what is going to come down the pike is, let's just say, this comes into play with that little scenario about the smell of the fish versus the wrapper that it came in. He thought that he was being given correct information, but subsequently it was found out it was not, apparently. Okay, so if this comes to a inquiry and then a investigation, he will be called in because it's his grant application, right? And he will be able to explain, I have a technician in my lab, or a student, or in this case, a PhD student, who I trusted to give me the correct data. I mean, I can't be in the lab collecting the data myself that I've entrusted somebody else to do. So he can explain that he did not know, he had no idea that this was not correct, trustworthy information. However, the PhD student is definitely guilty and is probably going to fry for this.
Steve, I have a quick question about this is kind of gray area. Now, you also mentioned that, quote unquote, she is under a lot of pressure, right?
Yep.
Now, what would constitute as coercion? I mean, we all are always under pressure, but how would one adjudicate whether if the student was, quote unquote, under some sort of actual coercion from the PI, or if it was just perceived pressure?
Yeah, so that's Sri brings up a very important question, and showing you this is not black and white. Okay, this is gray. So that's going to be difficult. You don't have enough information from the particulars that has been presented, whether or not the advisor is like, where are those data? I told you I need these data, as opposed to she thought in her own mind, I really want to do the right thing or the good thing for my PI, and he would be really pleased with this if I came up with good results. This would all factor into the investigation of the particulars. So it would not be, cut and dry. Okay. So the rationale of why or Janie did something is a little bit more blurry. But it leads me into, what should Janie do now?
So I think Janie should let her supervisor know what she did, the fact that she did falsify results or fabricate results. I think she should let her supervisor know before it gets any further.
So I would agree with that. It's incumbent for her to tell the truth and come forward, right? And also, it needs to go further, because if her PI is twisting in the wind under a investigation, the panel needs to know why this has come about. Her investigator had no idea that this was false information. Okay, so which means that the judgments will be different. So, and that brings me to the last part. What penalties might Janie face for her actions? Anybody? What do you think?
Afternoon. She could get public humiliation, disbarment, removal from editorial boards. These are some examples.
Well, in this case, this is a PhD student, so she's not on an editorial boards or on review panels. But what could happen to this student?
Expulsion.
Could be expelled or severely reprimanded, maybe have to take a extra training courses in RCR. There's no black and white here. You're out or not in. It depends on the gravity of the situation. And again, who did it impact? Okay. Was it a one-off? Was this the only time she did this? Is this a chronic pattern of behavior? Remember the consequences, how they're adjudicated, okay? And I thank you very much, everybody who chimed in. And I just want this last case. By the way, these names that I use throughout, these are just like coincidental. I hope nobody here is offended or has these names. But I wanted to mix it up. So Akbar is a new postdoctoral research fellow and is writing a review article with his mentor, Dr. I.B. Studley, who is a senior, well-established researcher with considerable gravitas in his field. However, he's experiencing difficulties with writing, primarily because his English is not his primary language. In the course of reading articles that are pertinent to his review, he finds several passages of text that say exactly what he wants to say in his review. So he uses the cut and paste feature of his computer program to excise multiple passages from multiple articles in the literature and insert them verbatim into his review article. Akbar submits his manuscript to Dr. Studley. At first, Dr. Studley is quite impressed with what Akbar has written and commends him on doing a fine job. But however, it later occurs to him that the text just doesn't sound the way Akbar normally speaks or writes. Also, he has an increasing sense of deja vu, i.e. that he's read these same words somewhere before. And the questions come, did Akbar commit scientific misconduct, and in follow-up, under what part of the ORL definition of scientific misconduct?
And we are nearing the end of our session, so anybody wants to answer, please go ahead.
Anybody? This is an easy one.
Sure, I'll chime in here. I believe this is potentially plagiarism.
Most certainly plagiarism. Cut and pasted verbatim from other people's work. Yes. And this would be detected, by the way, by a program like Authenticate that I illustrated to you. If Akbar had been more crafty and had slightly changed the wording of the excised passages so that they were not verbatim per se, would this change your answer? And why or why not? How about, is Michelle still with us? No? Sri, why don't
Yeah,
you?
I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, you are here? Okay, good. Michelle, what do you think?
Is he? Well, if he had slightly changed the wording, no, that wouldn't have been good enough. The appropriate thing would either be to write it as an original thing or to actually quote it and cite the original source.
Exactly right. Is Akbar justified in his actions given that English is not his primary language? Is it less egregious? Why or why not? Samantha, what do you think?
So while we do see more plagiarism, as you had mentioned, in places where English is not the primary language, I don't think it's less egregious just because he does. There are resources that can help with writing and with English for persons for whom it's not their first language. So I don't think he's justified in his actions.
Does everybody understand that? That is actually the correct answer. And that, for instance, Elsevier, one of the world's largest publishing houses in scientific literature and biomedicine, has professional English language assistance on a fee basis. And I offer this every week to at least 5 or 6 people who submit manuscripts to my journal. As I mentioned, we have a very large preponderance, maybe 80% of the articles we receive are from China or Asia Pacific. And I often refer people to that service. What consequences might Akbar face for his actions? Again, he's a postdoctoral fellow. What do you think from the consequences slide that I presented? Anybody? Maybe Jerome?
Well, at our institution, usually when persons are accused of plagiarism, they have to kind of face like a bit of a trial for it, or they have to speak to why they did it. So I'm not sure if that would be what would happen in here, that he might have to explain his actions, or he might actually suffer from expulsion as well. That might be an option here too. But he might have to justify his actions in front of a board or review committee.
Yeah, so also depends on first person he's going to have to answer to is Dr. Studley, right? And then it depends whether if this manuscript was actually submitted for review, right? So if it never left the desk of Dr. Studley, his discussion would probably just end with Dr. Studley. But if it was submitted for review, and it was found out that it was plagiarized, now this could escalate very reasonably to an institutional level inquiry, and then investigation, and then following adjudication. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. We really appreciate all the incredible information. The slides have been posted actually twice within the chat, so please feel free to take them if you need to. And I don't see any more questions, but if anybody has them, we can remain on for a few moments in order to answer your questions. And thank you very much. Excellent presentation.
Also, I wanted to invite people, if there are any questions that you ever come up with in the course of your career here, and you don't know exactly how to deal with it, please reach out to me. I'm very happy to give you some advice. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you everyone for coming. We really appreciate your attendance.
Thanks very much, everybody. See you next Monday.
Thank you. Have a great day.